4 disturbing, true hospital and asylum stories. In some of these stories, I play a female. Just an FYI. Hospital Maniac by Plastic Chew Toy. A while ago, I got a job at a small hospital just out of town. I was excited as it was my first job I'd been offered since my schooling. It was just casual work, but I was still ecstatic at the chance to work there as the money was great and it was the place that I did my practicum at. Most of the time, I would do 12-hour shifts, 7 a.m. to 7 p.m. Sometimes, I would be given the 3 to 11 shifts. I didn't care for those much. I was used to working late from my previous job, but I had to drive a lot further to get home and the late shifts are very slow usually. Another reason I didn't like them was because there was not very many people on staff and I would get lonely. Usually 4 nurses, 1 admin, me, and the emergency doctor. That's it. Now, being in a small hospital like this one, you see some pretty strange things come in. Some people can't make it into the city and so have had the emergency STARS helicopter have to drop in now and then. I've seen terrible things like whole families die from accidents on the curved country roads. I've even had people bring in animals in desperation as there was no vet nearby that was open. This one particular night, around 10 p.m., I was sitting, talking with one of the RNs about a patient's chart, but mostly just wasting time until I can go home at 11 p.m. The hospital was quiet and I'd only checked around 6 people into emerge at this point. I remember I was eating my yogurt and I heard a strange noise coming from the main doors. I saw a man walking towards us. He looked mostly normal, but he had a long coat on, which was strange as it's the middle of summer and even though it's dark out, it's still relatively warm. The RN next to me sighed and got up to go to the bathroom, leaving me to tend to our new arrival. As he drew closer, the strange sounds got louder and something caught the light. He was dragging something behind him that I couldn't quite make out, but I assumed it was metal by the noise it was making. It sent a shiver up my spine. He stopped at the desk and I could see his eyes were wide, his pupils big. His face was pale and he looked like he hadn't slept in a while. I'd seen this look many times and immediately associated it with someone who was high on something. He leaned on the desk and ran his fingers through his hair, pulling at it and grinding his teeth. When people like this come in, they're usually looking for drugs. Most of the time, they will complain of a migraine or fibromyalgia, anything we can't prove the contrary of. I processed him as usual and noticed he was getting more and more irritable as time passed. Eventually, when I finished and pointed him toward the waiting area, he asked how long it would be. Knowing that the on-call doc had gone on a quick break, I estimated a half hour. That's when his whole demeanor changed. The anger on his face was obvious as he stormed over to the waiting area, which is a room in between a merge and the front desk area with doors. As he walked away, I got a glance of what he was dragging and I came to the quick realization that it was an axe. I panicked and almost called the code over the paging system, but I didn't want him to realize. I promptly called the police on my cell phone and ran down the hall to signal to the nurses that we had an issue. The police would have to come from 2 towns over, which takes an average 20 minutes. Of course, as we are all small girls, we didn't want to go near him. He was tall and muscular. Even all combined, we probably wouldn't stand a chance. I calmly walked back to the front desk and paged the doctor, asking him to call me. I waited and waited, but never got a response. I watched the man getting more agitated, and soon he started yelling and asking for help. I hid from him, not wanting him to come back to me, and we devised a plan to lock him in the waiting area. The glass is reinforced and the doors are heavy, so it should hold him in there until the police arrived. The plan went down without a hitch until the man realized what we'd done. He started screaming and throwing chairs around the room. He was alone, so we didn't have to worry about him hurting anyone. Then, he started using his axe on the door and glass to the front desk area, where we were all standing and watching. I've never been so terrified in my life, and what made it even worse was the fact that he was making some headway on the door. It was at this time that the emerge doc walks in the front door of the hospital, sipping on a drink from the Max over the road. He saw us all huddled behind the desk and quickly took charge of the situation. After getting all the necessary information, he disappeared towards the back entrance of the emerge, the way ambulances bring patients in. He unlocked the front door of the waiting room and tackled the man to the floor when he wasn't looking, and then proceeded to tie him up with cable ties. He sat on his back until the cops arrived. I was so thankful for having the young, physically fit doc with us on that night. I bought him coffee every time our schedules crossed as a thank you, but I didn't think it would ever be enough. As this was the second incident that went down for me as I worked a late shift, I decided to never work late shifts again. I'm now a Monday to Friday 9 to 5 worker. Much safer that way. Bloodied Guy in the Hospital by Rio92. So, to give you a bit of backstory, a few years ago, I started to suffer with a lot of stomach problems. Fast forward 4 years and turns out I've got a stomach ulcer. Not ideal. Anyways, last summer, I had to spend a night in hospital running some tests on it. The main hospital isn't in my town, so my boyfriend offered to drive me up. We got there quite late, probably around 9 p.m, and when I arrived, the nurse there mentioned my boyfriend couldn't stay. I didn't like the idea of staying alone, mainly because I hate hospitals, so he offered to stay until they kicked him out. We fell asleep and got woken up about 6 a.m. by one of the nurses, explaining that they'd forgotten to ask my partner to leave, and even though she didn't mind, the head nurse would be on her way shortly to do her morning rounds and I shouldn't have a visitor in my room. So my boyfriend offered to go down to the car for a few hours to sleep more, and once they'd finished the tests, they'd let me go. Anyways, this is where it got weird. About 5 minutes into him leaving, this random guy walks into my room and sits down, telling me the nurses asked him to come in here. I know it sounds stupid, but I guess I was in shock for a few minutes because I sort of believed him. Then I started probing him, and his answer was the same. He was asked to sit in here. By now, my fight or flight kicks in. Well, sort of. And I ran into the bathroom with my phone. Don't ask why I didn't run into the corridor. Again, I clearly don't cope well in these situations. So I get to the bathroom and call my boyfriend, who is crazy protective of me, and tell him what's happened. He immediately makes his way back from the car. At this point, from the bathroom, I can hear the guy shouting, "What's this young girl's name? What age is she?" I don't know who he's shouting to because no one is answering him. Thankfully, I can hear my boyfriend coming back into the room and asking the guy who he was. This must have startled him because he ran off down the hall. When I came out of the bathroom, I noticed my boyfriend had a horrified look on his face. What I should have also mentioned is that I wear contacts, but had taken them off before falling asleep. So between not having full sight and, in my panic, I'd missed that the man's hands, feet, and clothes had blood on them because he'd left a trail of blood across the floor, across the wall, and onto the chair he was sat on. At this point, I went down the hall to nurse's station, still a little in shock, and explained what happened. Right away, someone came up to clean the mess, but again, they asked my boyfriend to leave, something he wasn't exactly happy about. The nurses were clearly trying to keep me calm as they tried to make full light of it, but I knew something wasn't right. And at this stage, I realized the guy is actually keeping a close eye on my room because no sooner had my boyfriend left, the man walked back in, closed the door, and began walking towards me, sitting on the bed. Thankfully, the nurse was present this time and demanded the man leave. I don't think they'd taken me too seriously until now, but finally, they noticed that having a bloodied man continuously trying to break into my room was shaking me, and they told me it was safer to have my boyfriend with me, as he must have been the guy's biggest deterrent. Rightly so, because for the rest of the morning, the guy kept walking past my room, trying to peer through to see if my partner was still there. He eventually gave up or was sent somewhere else. I finished my tests and was allowed home. The nurses tried to tell me the guy had a head injury, which was the reason he was in hospital, but they were obviously worried enough for my safety to let my boyfriend stay in the room. Anyways, what worries me the most is that the guy was definitely watching my room, because every time my boyfriend left, he came in right away. It doesn't bear thinking about what would have happened if the nurses had kicked my boyfriend out in the middle of the night. The creeper that followed me home from the hospital by Freaked Out. I'm a female in my mid-20s, and I work in my local hospital. This happened last week when I finished my shift in the evening, 8 PM. It was still light outside, and I decided to walk the 20 minutes home. Whenever I'm walking, I tend to listen to music on my iPod and just zone out. Not the safest idea, I know, but most of us do it. A few minutes into my walk, I have to cross a bridge over the motorway. As you walk up the slope to the bridge, there is a small wooded area on either side of you. I could feel something or someone around me, so I casually stopped my music and had a look around me. Nothing was out of place, and I thought maybe it was me being overly sensitive. I kept the music off though, just in case, and carried on walking. A few seconds later, I heard rustling behind me and turned around, startled. Again, nothing was there. At this point, my heart is racing, but I'm trying to convince myself I'm being paranoid. I got to the top of the bridge and am now out in the open and can see all around, so I'm feeling a lot better. 2 minutes later, and I'm nearing home and I'm laughing to myself about how silly and paranoid I was. At this point, I'm as relaxed as I can be and my music is back on and I'm just enjoying winding down from work. I've now just reached the top of the park, which sits opposite my road, and I'm all perked up as I'm nearly home. I looked behind me. I hadn't heard anything or really sensed anything to my knowledge, but I'm very thankful I did look. I saw a guy about 3 feet behind me. He was that close. This guy was tall, skinny, and had greasy black hair that hung around his face. He was dressed all in black. The creepiest part was that he looked dead behind the eyes. He was staring directly at me, and there was nothing there, just blank. I turned back round and started walking at speed down the park, hoping that I was just being silly. I contemplated rummaging in my bag for my phone to call the police, but didn't want to slow myself down, and still, at this point, wondered if I was misreading the situation. The creeper carried on following me, and although he wasn't as close as 3 feet anymore, he'd still significantly kept up speed. Every time I looked behind me, he was staring directly at me. Still, no emotion, still completely dead behind the eyes. I contemplated heading somewhere else and trying to lose him, but at this point, I was terrified and just wanted to get to the safety of my house. As my house came into view, I decided to just run for it, which I should have done sooner, evidently. As I looked behind me, I noticed the creeper wasn't running after me, but still just walking fast and staring at me. I got to my door and rummaged through my bag for my keys, completely aware that any moment now, the creeper could have caught up. I grabbed them and hurriedly let myself into the house when he was 15 feet away. I slammed and locked the door behind me and then ran up the stairs. The front door has glass panels, and our living room area has big glass doors facing the back garden. I didn't want him to be able to see me. I was shaking like mad as I edged up the stairs and looked out of our stairs window. He was nowhere to be seen. I went upstairs and looked out of the bedroom window to get a better view of the front garden, and I couldn't see him. I thought he'd gone. With my heart still racing, I got my phone out of my bag and headed downstairs to call the non-emergency number. As I walked into my living room, his face was pressed up against the glass, peering into my house, and we made eye contact. Dead eyes again. I let out quite the scream and ran back upstairs. I called the emergency number. As I waited for the police, the creeper had taken a seat in my garden, cross-legged, just staring at the house. The police came within 10 minutes and picked him up. He went without any struggle. The policewoman that came told me he told them. I was just waiting for her. Turns out, the creeper is a patient in the psychiatric ward of my hospital. From what I've found out since, he'd had a bit of a fascination with me from seeing me around the hospital doing my job. Some people I know in the psychiatric unit tell me he'd been mentioning his girlfriend recently, and they all thought it was another patient. They now think he was talking about me. He's been moved to another hospital now, somewhere where he can recover and I won't be afraid to go to work. And I'm hoping he doesn't have the freedom to just leave as and when he wants if he plans on creeping on hospital staff. I do hope he gets better, but I'm finding it hard to have warm wishes for him when he terrifies me as much as he did. I will definitely be catching the bus from now on. I Don't Like the Asylum by Jago89. So I worked as a police officer in the UK between the ages of 19 to 24. I am now 26, and I'm male. I left for personal reasons not connected to the story. One late shift, about 2 years ago from now, I was posted to the diary car. Essentially, I was to deal with scheduled appointments for low-level non-urgent crime. It was a bit of a bum posting, but we all had to take it in turns to free up the rest of the guys for the emergencies. The key thing with this posting is that it's for one officer only, so I was alone. I got to my 8 p.m. appointment, which was at a mental health hospital, a place I and most officers probably go to near enough every week. This is because patients under section abscond regularly, and the hospital has to report it to the police as a protocol. 9 times out of 10, they return of their free will, perfectly safe and well. Tonight, I was sent to debrief a patient who had returned. Essentially, I have to make sure they are back and that they are safe and nothing had happened to them whilst missing, that kind of thing. I'd like to add that I've had a phobia of the mentally ill, particularly women. I hate going to this hospital and it never got any easier for me, but I had to do my job. The hospital is old and creeps the hell out of me, from the outside anyway. It has dark brown brickwork, huge windows, and what looks like a bell tower rising from the center. It looks like an old church building. Essentially, it looks like an asylum from a horror movie. I thought I might share a photo of it, but it is very distinct and would give away the story's location, so I'm not sure I can. I went inside and presented myself to reception, who escorted me onto the ward through 2 locked doors opened by staff electronic fobs. It's very clinical and white inside. Smells of bleach and alcohol like most hospitals, so nothing like the outside. I get into the ward office and speak to the staff nurse. She gives me all the details I need, but in doing so, as per usual, I'd been spotted by half the patients on the ward already. The office is locked, but is in the center of the ward. I called it the Goldfish Bowl because every wall has a continuous window going all the way around and it's like looking out of a fishbowl. The uniform I'm in is a massive draw for the patients and they all surround the glass, tapping on it, shouting things at me etc. Reminds me of The Walking Dead a bit. I'm used to this though. It happens near enough every time. I do need to speak to Mary though, the patient who returned, so I know I have to walk through all that lot. I don't like it, but 2 members of staff come with me and we walk through. No one touches me, just a few unkind words, but eventually we get to Mary's room. The door is open and I look in before entering to see Mary sat on the bed. I don't recognize her and I'm sure I haven't dealt with her before. She had dark blonde hair, fairly long. It was really greasy and hadn't seen a brush in a while. I knew from the details I was given that she was 25 years old. She sat on the bed, hunched over, head looking down. She was wearing a t-shirt, about 5 sizes too big for her, but nothing on the bottom that I could see. The t-shirt was huge though, and covered everything. I said hello and explained why I was there, that I needed to ask her a few short questions, whilst reassuring her she was not in any kind of trouble. She said nothing. The staff members I was with then had to leave as something was going on with another patient. I went to step into the room, and Mary screamed at me, "No, don't!" I stayed outside the room as I could just speak to her from behind the threshold of the door without causing her any unnecessary distress, or me for that matter. She then turned her head to look at me. I know she was unwell, but she looked terrible. Her lips were chapped, and she had sores on her face that have obviously been picked at. I could now see she had self-harm scars down her arms too, and lots of them. Her eyes were so dark I could not make out her pupils, really chilling eyes like a deep sadness, but also something very sinister. I'm uncomfortable, but I hide it and go to begin my questions. She interrupts me and says sharply, "I know why you're here." I assume she's had debriefs before and she knows the system by now. But then she said this, "You're here to kill me, James. He sent you, and now you've come." She referred to me by my first name. This shocked me. It's common for an officer's rank, surname, and shoulder number to be given out, but never their first name, not even to staff from the hospital, let alone patients. I don't know what to say. I want to ask her how she knows my name, but then I hesitate and think to myself, don't let on that that's actually your name. She continues before I have a chance to say anything. "I'm not letting you take me, James. I will kill you, because you will kill me." She then screams very loudly. I'm frozen. I've dealt with a lot of shit in my job, but this was truly terrifying for me. Still sat on the bed, but looking at me, she then rolls her eyes back so I can see only white, and with her long, overgrown fingernails, she starts scratching violently at her arms and face. Blood is drawn instantly. I'm still not reacting. This is by far and large the freakiest thing I've had to witness in the line of duty. Luckily, the nurses heard and came over. They restrained her and suggested I may want to leave to help her calm down. I did so immediately. This interview was very much over. As I walked down the corridor, I could hear her screaming my name. Someone let me out, and I walked back out to my vehicle, got in the driver's seat, and took a few minutes. I was shaking. I could still hear her screaming my name inside my head. She was Shutter Island kind of scary, and I remember her vividly to this day. All of this went into my report, by the way. So how did she know my name? I'm really not sure. My name isn't James. It's less common than that, so I ruled out it being complete coincidence. The only rational thing I can think of is that, being a regular visitor, I must have been with a colleague who had said my name on a previous occasion. She must have heard it and remembered. This scares me, but it's the only way, surely. Needless to say, I would check from time to time to see if she had absconded again. She did a couple of times, but eventually went off the radar, perhaps transferred or released. I did not know. I still have nightmares about her, coming to kill me.